What's up, y'all? We have so much to talk about today, so I'm just going to get straight into the news. Chris Woodward got fired today, and I think Rangers social media just imploded. Like, people had all kinds of reactions. I definitely feel bad for him because he was put in a bad situation, right? The roster the last 4 years hasn't been that great until really this year was the first signs of life in the roster. They got Marcus Simeon, they got Corey Seager, they got John Gray, who, when healthy, he's been pretty good. Of course, a few years ago, they had Mike Minor, Lance Lynn, and Corey Kluber, but that fell apart pretty quickly, unfortunately. So, my point is, he got dealt a bad hand and did what he could with it. Heavily criticized. I'm guilty of it as well. But it comes down to the roster, right? The manager can only do so much with the roster, and there's a set expectation of wins based on the structure of the team. So we'll get into that conversation a little bit later, but this was the official statement from the team. Quote, Chris Young and I had the very difficult task of informing Chris Woodward of our decision today, said Rangers president of baseball operations John Daniels. In his tenure as a Rangers manager, Chris worked tirelessly under what was at times difficult circumstances. He had been dedicated and passionate in his efforts to improve the on-field performance of the Texas Rangers, and it is greatly appreciated. He has represented the organization with class and dignity, and he goes on to say more nice things about Chris Woodward. Now, I do want to point out that you see right here, it's a president of baseball operations. People forget that John Daniels is not the GM anymore, technically. It is Chris Young. So keep that in mind. But this was a hire under John Daniels when he was still the GM. And the other super important news is Tony Beasley is now the interim manager. He is the longest tenured on the team, I think, since like 2014. So it says it right there, longest tenured member of the staff. So it's been a long time coming for Beasley to get some kind of opportunity. I'm very happy for him. He's always been classy, always been fun, and he has a great attitude. So I'm curious to see how he can do this 48 games left. I'm not expecting any difference in terms of like Rangers suddenly going on a 20-game win streak or something, but I think he can bring some good energy to the team, a new mentality, and it's tough to say anything yet because he has not managed a single game yet at the major league level. So we'll see tonight in a few hours, I think, is the game when I'm recording this. So yeah, that's the short there. Obviously, Woodward's time was not great, 211 and 287. He was 2 games shy of his 500th game managed with the club, so that kind of sucks. They couldn't get him to that milestone. I just thought it was weird timing with the firing because there's 48 games left, and I don't see a sudden change in trajectory. So I don't know. I thought they'd give him till the end of the season at earliest because they had him signed through 2023 with a club option for 2024, I think. So anyway, moving on though. This is the same quote, just Evan Grant pointing out that he was the one that hired Woodward to be manager. So just remember that, and emphasizing that Chris Young will have to step up to the plate here and hire the next guy. Now, moving on to some knowledge from T.R. Sullivan. If you don't know who he is, very long time Rangers journalist, reporter for Star-Telegram and MLB.com, absolute legend, and former colleague Mike Petrillo, I might have been butchering that, I'm sorry, thought it was weird that he got fired because, yeah, they're 4th place and they increased their run differential, but he didn't think it was the right time to fire him. And TR went on to say, Woodward was fired by the Rangers. It's always the guys in the field wearing a uniform that take the fall around here, which is an interesting take. I don't disagree with it, but I just thought it was interesting that he put that in there. Woodward was asked to lead the team through a massive rebuild. It's hard to imagine anybody doing that much better with what he was given. And that was my point a minute ago. You look at the rosters, they haven't been that great recently. I've had a few standout players, of course, like 2019, 2020, even a little bit into 2021, Joey Gallo doing pretty well. And they had, towards the beginning of Woodward's tenure, they had Andrews, they still had Odor, although they were starting to decline, unfortunately. But now they kind of have some decent players going, which is why I thought it was weird that they gave him up now. But, Lowe at first, Simeon at second, Seager at short, Ezekiel Duran at third for now, with also Josh Young coming up soon, hopefully. And the outfield is starting to come together. Bubba Thompson, Leody Taveras, Adolis Garcia has been a staple for a couple years now. So it's really just the pitching side, but even the rotation is starting to form. Martin Perez with an absolute standout year so far. John Gray hasn't fully been able to stay healthy, but when he's been out there, he's been solid. He's just a good innings eater, And he's had some nice outings as well. I'm not going to discredit him there. The rest of the rotation is kind of a question mark. I mean, they're just pending, but it's cool to see Cole Reagans show up, which I learned I was saying his name wrong. It's Reagans, not Ragans. So apologies to him. But anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. So this was TR's take on the whole thing. As well as this is the hitting the nail on the head here. The Rangers are only going to be as good as their ability to develop young pitching, get it to the big leagues, and have those guys be successful at the big league level. Everything else is secondary. And I'll tell y'all, this man does not miss. He knows baseball so well. This is the most level-headed take of this whole situation, these two tweets. So I had to retweet this. And then this was a repeated quote that I didn't realize was from both of these screenshots. But Joseph Hoyt quoting John Daniels about they appreciated Woodward's representation of the team, the organization, and everything like that. So kudos to them for being classy about it. They did mention that Tony Beasley is a full-time candidate going into next year, as of course they don't have anyone yet. I've seen some names float around. Not really going to talk about it in this video, but they also did explain themselves on the reasoning for letting him go now. They want to create some momentum going into 2023, which is interesting as well. I think it makes sense. It's an interesting move, but, giving him a fresh set of eyes, I guess, and seeing what happens. And Daniels did acknowledge the accountability for the roster construction falling on him, Chris Young, and the rest of the front office, but said they wanted to see some things, quote, addressed differently in terms of how the team prepared, approached, and executed games. In short, the team has been sloppy. So it's good that he's taken some accountability. But like I mentioned before, that's why I said pay attention here, because he is not the GM. He's the president of baseball operations. So, and it's been that way since they got Chris Young, slowly transitioning Chris Young to be the full-time GM. And he's done a standout job as well. So, lastly, a little bit of wisdom from Tony Beasley that I think we can all take off the field as well. What we think of ourselves is what we are, and we need to think of ourselves more highly. So, speaking words of wisdom, Tony Beasley. No, I'm excited to see what he can do. Sucks for Woodward, like I said. It's a tough situation. Really, at any time, the managers in any sport, any team, any time in history, they're the ones that take the brunt of the blame. And in some cases, it makes sense. You look at 2020 World Series, they pulled Blake Snell, end up losing the whole thing. Is that a managerial move? Yes. Is it the manager's fault? Not necessarily, because you go in expecting to have the guys you're putting in the game execute. But there's a lot of layers, is all I'm saying. It's not all the manager, it's not all the players, and it's not all the front office. It's kind of a checks and balances, you know. So, not to get too philosophical on y'all, but it's tough to just say, okay, Woodward is gone, Rangers are going to the World Series. You can't say that. That's just not how it works. They're going to work this offseason, it sounds like, truly, to improve the roster and specifically the pitching and see what they can do next year. Next year, they should be able to make a wild card run. They're not even technically out of it this year. It's very, very unlikely, but they're 9.5 games back of a wild card spot. I've seen crazier things, you know. It's not probably going to happen, but my point being, this was a move to set up for the future. I told people lots of times this year that they hired Woodward, and TR said to himself, they hired him just to do the rebuild. And since they're effectively declaring the rebuild is supposed to be over now, starting next year, that they should get a new manager no matter how well Woodward did, because they hired him just for the rebuild. So that was my philosophy. Obviously, they acted upon it faster than most people thought. And seeing the trending here, I did want to mention, of course it changes when I go to highlight it, but Ron Washington, don't expect him to come here. Personally speaking, I don't see that happening. You never know, but I'll do a separate video in the off-season about candidates for the position, because no one's going to get hired right now. They're going to have Beasley ride things out for the rest of the season, and we'll go from there. So I tried to keep this video brief. It's still about 12 minutes long, but let me know what y'all think in the comments. There's a lot to talk about in this whole thing, and it kind of signifies that the Rangers are ready to start playing ball again for real. Not that they weren't, but the numbers speak for themselves, unfortunately. However, the run differential being only -2 with their record indicates they are so close to being able to compete again. So, best of luck to Woodward. I'm sure another team will pick him up because he is capable of managing games. You know, give him a decent roster, I'm sure he'll do well. Look at 2019. He won 78 games. So, obviously, there's something going on there that he's plenty capable, and they wouldn't have hired him if they didn't think so. Just because he's the rebuild guy, they weren't going to hire just anybody. So before I continue rambling on any longer, appreciate y'all watching, and we'll see how the Rangers do for the rest of the season and going into 2023.